Starting off this edition by cutting across straight to U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, joined by Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi in that joint address. Take a listen.
Abuses or violations occur across Myanmar. In all of my meetings, I have called on Myanmar's civilian government to lead a full and effective independent investigation and for the military to facilitate full access and cooperation. The United States strongly supports such an approach. While we wait for the findings of a credible, independent investigation to provide an accurate assessment of the events that have occurred and to ensure accountability, the United States will continue to work with our partners to assure there are consequences for individuals confirmed to have been responsible for atrocities using all available mechanisms, including those available under U.S. law. We support the government of Myanmar's goals of developing its military into a professional and respected institution. As I told Commander-in-Chief Min Aung Hlaing, the military's support for Myanmar's ongoing transition to a federal, democratic state is crucial. As part of that process, the military and government must work together to address the grievances of civilians throughout Myanmar and build strong, credible institutions. It cannot do so without acknowledging, addressing, and bringing to an end the tactics and practices that led to abuse and suffering. We recognize the military's responsibility to respond to terrorist or other insurgent attacks. Any response, however, must be disciplined and avoid to the maximum extent possible harming innocent civilians. We will be following up with the Myanmar government to explore opportunities to collaborate on areas of counter-violent extremism and counterterrorism. While many are currently focused on Rakhine State, we must remember that there are other ongoing violent conflicts in Kachin, Shan State, and elsewhere. These conflicts have also included serious human rights abuses and violations which have led to the suffering of many ethnic communities. We support efforts to find a resolution to these conflicts and to seek peace, justice, and national reconciliation. A just and durable peace is needed for Myanmar to move forward in its transition to democracy. The United States and friends from around the region are committed to helping the government of Myanmar and its people work through this crisis with urgency, sensitivity, and openness. We remain dedicated to Myanmar's successful transition, which we are confident will bring peace and prosperity to this rich and beautiful land. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Now it's time for the questions. Before.
Well, just let me briefly thank Secretary Tillerson for his understanding of the situation. We have discussed the matter in some detail, and we agree that it is most important that we should bring peace and stability to this country, and that can only be done on the basis of rule of law. And everybody should understand that the rule of law is to protect peace and stability, not to punish people. If we all understand this, then I think we can cooperate on these issues which are of great concern to the United States as well as to other members of the international community. As Secretary Tillerson said, we have been friends for many years, ever since we became independent. Our relationship with the United States has been strong, and we believe that this relationship will endure the test of time and circumstances, and that although there may be obstacles that we have to overcome, with understanding and friendship on both sides, I'm sure these could be overcome without too much difficulty. And of course, we recognize that the existing challenges are very great indeed, and multifaceted. It's not a one-dimensional Rakhine problem. It's a multi-dimensional problem that applies to the whole of our country, which is why we are all involved in its resolution. The Union enterprise for humanitarian assistance, resettlement, and reconstruction of the Rakhine is something that belongs to all our people. And this has to start with the building of understanding, with taking up the responsibility for harmony between our different communities. It is the duty of each and every citizen of this country, and we hope that we will all be able to carry it out as fully as possible with the help of our friends. Thank you.
Before asking the questions, please identify yourself and the media organization you represent, and to whom you are addressing the question. The first question, please.
Tillerson, following your conversations with the State Council and given the absolute horrific scene to what extent are you satisfied that they understand the urgency with which they need to act and what it is they actually need to do?
Well, I think clearly, as you point out, the scenes of what occurred up there are just horrific. And the Commander-in-Chief shared certain parts of their own internal investigation with me. However, as I indicated in my remarks, I think there still is more that we need to understand about what happened, and that's why we believe an independent investigation would be helpful to everyone to understand what transpired and who should be held to account. I am encouraged by the ongoing discussions that we know are underway between Myanmar and Bangladesh to enter into a new memorandum of understanding that will facilitate a quick return of those individuals who most recently left, who want to come back home. So I think there's a lot of effort on that front. Obviously, this is something that has to be worked out with the Bangladesh government as well. And then I think in terms of the need to create a secure environment so that if people want to come home, they feel secure to come home. There is some need to reconstruct certain villages that were destroyed so they have shelter to come home to. And what most of these people want is simply to return to the life they had before, which was a fairly simple life, a lot of fishing and farming. So there's a lot of work to do, and I think people need to recognize this is not an easy situation that one can deal with quickly, but it does need to be dealt with in a very deliberate way.
I have a question for each of you, specifically, Madam Counselor. In 2014, when President Obama was here, he largely heralded as this beacon of hope and democracy and change for this country. Since the humanitarian crisis, you've received a lot of criticism for being largely silent on this crisis. Ma'am, why have you been silent on this crisis? And also, now, Mr. Secretary, specifically, you talked about the consequences concerning this crisis. Largely, the UK and the EU have both called this situation, the humanitarian crisis here, a case of ethnic cleansing. And I'm wondering why the United States has not used that term yet. And also, again, if you can be more specific with some of the consequences the United States is considering if the crisis doesn't end.
I don't know why people say that I've been silent. I haven't been silent. Actually, we've been sending out a lot of statements from my office, and I've also made statements of my own. But I think what people mean is that what I say is not interesting enough. But what I say is not meant to be exciting. It's meant to be accurate, and it's aimed at creating more harmony and a better future for everybody, not for setting people against each other. We mustn't forget that there are many different communities in the Rakhine, and if they are to live together in peace and harmony in the long term, we can't set them against each other now. We cannot make the kind of statements and drive them further apart. This is the reason why we are very careful about what we say. But if you check, you will see that I have not been silent. I have not been making very incendiary statements or very exciting statements, but we have always kept the public informed of what has been going on and what we are trying to do to make the situation better.
Well, I think clearly what we know occurred in Rakhine State that led to so many people fleeing the area has a number of characteristics, certainly crimes against humanity. Whether it meets all the criteria for ethnic cleansing, I think we continue to evaluate that ourselves. I think this is the reason why an independent investigation would be very useful to help us understand not just who to hold accountable, but also why. You know, what were the motivations behind what occurred? On the heels of, again, I remind you, this started with an attack by the Arakan against Myanmar security forces, and then it was in the response that things seem to have gotten out of control. So I think an independent investigation would help all of us understand a number of aspects of what's a very, I think, complex situation. In terms of consequences, if the crisis doesn't end, I'm not sure how to exactly understand your question even. You can't will a crisis to end. You can't just pass a law and say, therefore the crisis is over. You can't just impose sanctions and say, therefore the crisis is over. Maybe those types of actions will motivate certain actions on the part of people who have to address the crisis, but that doesn't end the crisis. And I would say that, and I've learned a lot from this trip, and that was one of the reasons I came here, was because I wanted to listen as much as anything else, and I have a much greater appreciation for the complexities of the crisis that Myanmar is dealing with. And it's not one that is going to be quickly resolved. I think what we all want to see resolved quickly is the human suffering. We really want to see the human suffering relieved, because what people are enduring today is intolerable for any of us to watch. It's hard to watch what's happening. And so that's the sense of urgency, is we want to see the human suffering relieved. The crisis itself won't end until a lot of very deep issues are addressed, and that will take time.
The next question, please.
Well, as to the various sanction bills that are being drafted and considered, and I've been trying to follow those as best I can while I've been on the road for a couple of weeks, but I will be looking carefully at those when I return to Washington tomorrow night. I think broad-based economic sanctions against the entire country is not something that I would think would be advisable at this time. I think we want to see Myanmar succeed. The United States views this as an important relationship. We're here to support Myanmar. We want Myanmar to succeed. We want its democracy to succeed. And so actions that sets back the ability to provide economic activity, jobs for people, I have a hard time seeing how that helps resolve this crisis. In terms of targeted individuals, I think, again, all of that is evidence-based. Have credible information, and that's, as I said in my remarks, if we have credible information that we believe to be very reliable, that certain individuals were responsible for certain acts that we find unacceptable, then targeted sanctions on individuals very well may be appropriate. Again, I think the reason these things happen, the reasons people are motivated to want to talk about sanctions, is from their perception they're just not seeing enough happening yet. And it is difficult when you're sitting halfway around the world and you see the images from the refugee camps in Bangladesh to not want to just rush to do something. And so I think all of these efforts, whether sanction bills or others, they're all well intended. They're all well intended. These are people who care about what's happening over here. They care about the human tragedy that they're seeing happen. They care about Myanmar, and they're looking for some way to help. And some people feel that putting pressure on the situation sometimes helps motivate action. So I think it's something that we'll be considering carefully when I return to Washington, and I look forward to sharing with others what I've learned on this trip. It's been very useful to me to understand the situation better.
ကျွန်တော်နိုင်ငံရေးလုပ်တယ်ဆိုတာဩဇာအနာရဖို့လုပ်တာမဟုတ်ပါဘူးမြန်မာနိုင်ငံကပြည်သူလူထုထားတရားဥပဒေစိုးမိုးရေးငြိမ်းချမ်းရေးနဲ့စီးပွားရေးဖွံ့ဖြိုးမှုရဲ့အတိအပွင့်တွေကိုခံစားစေချင်လို့လုပ်ထားပါအဲ့တော့ဒီလိုနိုင်ငံရေးလုပ်တဲ့အခါမှာအတိုက်ခိုက်ခံရတယ်ဆိုတာဘာမှမထူးဆန်းပါဘူးဒါအရင်တုန်းကပြည်တွင်းကလည်းတိုက်တယ်ပြည်တွင်းကလည်းတိုက်တယ်အခုကျတော့ပြည်တွင်းကတော့ပြည်သူတွေကပို့ပြီးတော့နားလည်မှုရှိတယ်ပြည်သားကတော့တိုက်တယ်ပေါ့ဒါတွေကတော့ဖြစ်နေကြပါပြီနိုင်ငံရေးလုပ်မှတော့ဒီလောကဓာတ်ကိုရင်ဆိုင်ရတာဒါနေသူကပြစ်စင်တယ်တာဝန်ချမ်းဆောင်တဲ့လူတိုင်းကြစာရည်လည်းဒီမှာတော့ဒီလိုပဲသိနေထားပါI think it's a bit complicated because the question is not asked in English. I think you can ask your reporter to translate it to you later.
The fourth and final question, please.
Well, as I said, we're evaluating the criteria and the information available to us, and we'll make a determination on that probably after our return.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the joint press briefing is successfully concluded.
Could I just very briefly thank Secretary Tillerson for the open mind with which he came here. And I think an open mind is something very rare these days, and we appreciate it very much. And our exchanges have been very, very useful for both of us.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi addressing the media. A couple of takeaways largely over the situation in Rakhine State. Aung San Suu Kyi, when asked about the situation there, also Rex Tillerson responding, saying that the priority right now is to reduce the human suffering. Aung San Suu Kyi also saying that her statements as of now have focused on establishing accuracy and not giving out knee-jerk reactions as far as the situation is concerned. Important to highlight here that Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi has received widespread criticism from various quarters across the world for her failure, as they've put it, to contain the humanitarian crisis in Rakhine State. Myanmar's State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, joined by U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Tillerson saying that the current situation does look horrific, and at the same time the priority is to reduce the human suffering. Tillerson's visit coming amidst a worsening Rohingya crisis. Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi saying that she has all throughout the Rohingya crisis focused on establishing accuracy through her statements, but at the same time not convincing the questions, not giving out convincing responses to those questions that were put to her, point-by-point questions, focusing and asking her to explain her position on the Rohingya crisis. Important to highlight here yet again that Myanmar's State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi has attracted widespread criticism when it comes to the Rohingya crisis. Let's go straight across now to WION Senior Foreign Editor Padma Rao joining us for more on this. Padma, we've looked at the humanitarian crisis that, of course, is of Myanmar's making, spilling over into both Bangladesh and India. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson joined by the Myanmar's State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. But we have gotten that response from Suu Kyi, where she talks about how the priority is to reduce human suffering. To what extent do we see this as a deviation, if at all, from her earlier stance?
I don't think Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi is going to deviate from her stand at all, because I think what has set over, over Ms. Suu Kyi since she returned, or rather since she decided to cooperate with the military junta of Myanmar, is pragmatism. And she's absolutely right, she's absolutely right when she says that she cannot have been seen as speaking in two voices, one to her own people and the other addressed to primarily Western audiences who have always believed in an imposition, if you like, of a Western form of democracy in many countries. But without knowing the ground realities, this is not this is not easy to implement for leaders, no matter how much they may have been the poster girls of the West or the poster boys, as indeed Miss Aung San Suu Kyi has always been, being a Nobel laureate, and the West saw her as the beacon of the Western style of democracy in Myanmar, and that she has not adhered to that. I think she was trying to explain that to the visiting Secretary of State as the reason why her statements on the Rohingya crisis had to be tempered and measured in keeping with the requirements on the ground in her country.
Also, taking a closer look at the statements given out by the US Secretary of State, Padma, saying that the situation on ground looks horrific.
Yes, it's, I mean, I hate to sound cynical, but it's easy to say that when you're a visiting Secretary of State. The situation on the ground as far as refugees arriving from overseas are concerned, or even, what's happening on the ground in the United States. As you know, we just saw that horrendous shootout outside a school not so many hours ago. I think these are, issues which are equally of concern when looking at them from the outside. But it's up to every government to, to take stock of ground realities and see what can be done best. Now, the Rohingya crisis from the outside, you see visuals and very disturbing visuals of thousands, millions of people crossing seas, some drowning along the way. Certainly this is a very, very distressing migration that has taken place. But on the other hand, there are institutions in place in Bangladesh which have taken over the task of looking after the refugees. Many neighboring countries have been helping, chipping in, doing whatever they can do. So yes, it is a horrific crisis, but there are many horrific crises, similar crises, humanitarian crises, even human rights violations, if you will, taking place in many parts of the world, many of which the United States itself is embroiled in wars of the one kind or another. So one may argue from the Myanmarese point of view that this is a domestic matter, and thank you very much for your concern, but we are handling it. On the other hand, one may argue that one is a member of the world community, so a certain amount of adherence needs to be there. So I think this is why we're hearing we're seeing both sides take half a step towards each other. And in any case, remember, Molly, we have to, remember this is the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and we have seen that the US administration is prone to speak in two different voices on any given matter, as indeed has been the case in Myanmar. One was expecting a totally different policy on Myanmar from the United States under President Donald Trump, and he has indicated that himself on the periphery of many conferences when he discussed the subject. But this is Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who reportedly is not on the best of terms with his president. They have had words in very recent months, and many people in Washington say that this may not be a Secretary of State who will last. So, to a certain extent, despite his best intentions, he may be a lame duck Secretary of State on his way out.
All right, we're going to leave it there for the moment, Padma. Appreciate you joining us with all of those perspectives. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson calling the situation in Rakhine horrific. At the same time, Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi saying that this is a crisis which she has tried to contain. But important to highlight yet again that Myanmar State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi has attracted widespread criticism for her failure, as many have put it, to contain that crisis. We're going to leave it there for the moment, and it's a wrap on this edition for now, but do stay tuned to World is One News. Lots more coming up on the other side of it.